All right, welcome, Bruins. I hope you've had a productive and insightful summit thus far. I want to thank you for joining our final session on leading with purpose, care, and vision during times of social change. My name is Christian Chavez. I use he, him, his pronouns. To describe myself, I'm Latino. I have short brown hair. I'm also wearing a black sweater and have a navy background with our summit logo. I'm a staff member for the UCLA Alumni Association and a proud member of the planning committee that is presenting this summit. I'm very excited to introduce our panelist and moderator for today's session. I'd like to welcome Christine Cadena, Dr. Sangeeta Gupta, Tracy Mack, and Carmen Yee, as well as Paco Ratana, member of our UCLA Alumni Association Board of Directors, who will be facilitating the session. You may reference their biographies for the panelists on the Summit webpage, which will be posted in the chat box. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Paco to get the conversation started.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate you very much. Welcome all. Again, my name is Paco Retana. My gender pronoun is he, him, and él. I am the Vice President of Programs for an organization called Wellness, which we provide holistic mental health services in South LA and Los Angeles. I'm a proud board of director for the UCLA Alumni Association and Diversity Advisory Committee co-chair. I'm wearing a tannish shirt with some beads, spiritual beads. I'm a Latino, dark-skinned male, and with a virtual background is blue. So thank you all for being here and joining us today. I'm deeply honored and excited to share the sacred and safe space with the amazing and hardworking people on this panel. And what a beautiful time to do this on May Day, Workers' Day of International Unity and Solidarity. So welcome all. This panel will have crucial and courageous conversations. It's going to be real talk, as we say, right? With no guardrails. And these conversations require really authenticity. And we are blessed also while we go through today's webinar on that our ancestors are here to join us as well. So change makers, let's do this. Thank you. Welcome again. So first question that I have is, what does it mean to you all to lead with purpose, care, and vision during times of social change and unrest? And I'm going to go ahead and ask Christine if she can start us off.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an Asian woman with brown shoulder length hair. I'm wearing a black sweater, and behind me is a background that features Astro Boy. So thanks so much, Paco, for having me. To answer your question, I could go for hours on that one, but I'll just say that I try to think about that in sort of three layers. One, which is personal accountability. I think it starts with owning and understanding your own privilege, where you're coming from, your experience, your unique dimension, right? And I'll use dimensions in plural because we're all layered in our identity. Number two, a willingness to paint a vision for others and challenge folks to paint that vision and unify others through it. And I think that there are visions you can paint that separate folks and polarize them. And there are visions that you can paint that bring people together around a shared vision for the future. I think that's really important. And then finally, a willingness to challenge others to rise to the occasion and being willing to actually speak to those and meet them where they are, but challenge them to take one step forward.
Thank you, Christine. Way to start us off. And I love shared vision for the future. Thank you. So same question. What does it mean to you to lead with purpose, care, and vision during times of social change and unrest? Dr. Sangeeta Gupta.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sangeeta Gupta. I am of Asian Indian descent. I have dark brown hair that's a little past my shoulder, curly. And my background is the cabinet behind me in my office. filled with different things that I collected on my travels. So it's a pleasure for me to be here today. I'd like to talk about leading with purpose, care, and vision as far as leaders are concerned. So when I work with leaders, I help them look at two different things. One is depending on where they are on their journey. If DEI is already part of your overall business strategy, you're not reacting to the circumstances and what's going on in the environment because your vision is already in place. So it's not something that you're just having a knee-jerk reaction to, but it is, you have the human infrastructure in place. So you have knowledgeable and skilled people that help you lead during these times. And this is the time when your policies about what your company stands for are what should be helping you to lead, because you have that vision already in place. You're not suddenly trying to decide your vision as society is changing and reacting to things. So that's for leaders who already have this vision and everything into place, because HR is part of their strategic overall plan. For those organizations where you've not thought about this or you don't have this vision already in place, what I say to them is take a moment and really purposely think about what your plan is. Don't just react. I've seen this happen so many times when last year, so many organizations put out these fabulous statements, but they didn't do anything to back those statements up. And I think it's so important that if you're going to put out a vision or a statement, that you come up with a plan to actually back it up. Talk to people who are knowledgeable. Don't just grab the nearest person of color to help you put that vision into place. You've got to have that human infrastructure in place. Think about what you can really do to support your employees. Put a strategy into place, come up with actionable steps, implement them. But my overall point to them would be, if you don't already have a vision in place, put something into place, but then actually put it into place and act upon it. Don't just put out empty words, because I think that's where you're going to lose a lot of people, because you're not leading with purpose and you're not leading with vision.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. What does your company stand for? That's great. Tracy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Mack. I am she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a Black woman with long Senegalese twists in my hair. I am currently wearing not sweatpants or leggings for once in the last year, but I am wearing a green dress and a yellow necklace. And my background is a navy with the conference logo. When I think about vision and purpose in this specific space, I think what's really, really important is to first name the problems. I think a lot of people understand that things are not right, but a lot of times we don't talk about what the exact problems are and how racial injustice or privilege actually manifest in our particular businesses or departments as leaders. So to actually say, like, here's where we're seeing the repercussions of this, right? And here's what we want to change is the first thing. I think it helps a lot, because when you talk about, 400, 500 years of injustice and oppression, that's not something we're going to solve with a PowerPoint or a quick, a quick seminar. That we're trying to boil the ocean here, right? And it becomes overwhelming to people a lot of times. So to really kind of break it down to the problems you're trying to solve, and then again, make it endemic to your organization. Every day, every meeting, address something in the space, so that it is not like a special thing that we all go do on one day. It's not a special meeting that we have and then we're finished with it. Every meeting, whether it's land acknowledgements, pronouns, making sure you're changing up who's taking notes, things, it can be literally at every level. And I think that's what I really think about, is having the long-term vision to say, all right, what are the problems we're trying to solve and what does success metrics look like? And then how are we executing on that every single day?
Thank you, Tracy. So Carmen, how do you lead with purpose, care, and vision during these times of social change?
Hi everyone, my name is Carmen Yi. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a Chinese American woman with black hair at my collarbone. I am currently wearing a bright pink shirt and my background is navy blue with the Summit logo. So after hearing the other panelists' questions, I kind of feel like in elementary school when you kind of did the assignment, maybe like a little different from everyone else. So I really approached this from a personal lens, because it was I looked at it as what's my purpose, my care, and my vision. Because if we don't take care of ourselves in normal times, much less the year that we've had, we can't do it for anyone else in our personal or professional lives. So breaking down the question purpose, I really thought about, personal purpose and reminding ourselves, why are you called to do this work? We all know that it's exhausting. What motivates you to get out of bed and keep doing it every day, and to remember that purpose so you keep feeling that motivation? And for me, my purpose is to work with more people like me who are immigrants, first generation college students, low income, to be in spaces that they're passionate about. The part about care is caring for myself, caring for each other. I read this really great quote recently that said, refill your tank before it's empty. Because how often have we come to the end of a really hard week or a really hard month and we're like, wow, I am totally depleted. Maybe I should have taken time for some care earlier. And then the last question about, or the last part about vision, is remembering what's my larger vision for myself. So ask yourself, what's your greater vision? Is it to lead a small business? Is it to work in higher education? And whatever it is, does your current work lend to that vision? If it does, that's so awesome. What can you do? What can you keep doing to move the needle? And if your current work doesn't totally relate to that larger vision, like, what changes do you want to make? And can you find the support and the strength to make those changes so that your vision and your work align?
Thank you, Carmen. That right on. And the question about why are we called to do this work is spot on. So thank you for sharing that insight with us. Okay, I'm going to move us to the next question, and that is, how have you demonstrated your own loyalty, compassion, and commitment to those you lead during challenging times or events over the past year? So I'm going to open it up to the panel to respond to that question. And at this point, I'm just going to see who would like to jump in there to respond to that question.
I can go ahead and respond first. Thanks, Paco.
Thank you, Carmen.
Really, the first example that came to mind was how my current supervisor actually demonstrated his loyalty, compassion, and commitment to me. So in the middle of March, I went through a series of really traumatizing and tiring personal events. At the same time, literally the same day that the Atlanta shootings took place, and the majority of those victims were Asian American women. So it was a lot of grief and trauma compounded at once. And without question, my boss said, take time off. Don't even think about anything but taking care of yourself. You've been through a lot. Anything that gets sent to you that needs a response, please forward it to me. And this is at a time when he's also trying to hold down a lot of things for the company. And so I have really taken examples like that from my current boss, from my last boss, to show me how to act with compassion towards others. So a more recent example is that my organization is dealing with some financial difficulties right now, and we had to address the very honest question to our staff of, should they be looking for new jobs? And I think leading with compassion here is being honest so that people can take care of themselves and do what they need to do. Working in people operations and HR, I always tell our staff, I put the person before the employee. So whatever you need to do as a person to take care of yourself is always a priority over what you need to do as employee for the company. And I know at a lot of places, this may not be a popular or an encouraged view, but really it's about taking care of your whole self. So we told staff, yes, if that's what you need, we won't have news for at least another 2 weeks, but if you need more time than that to start looking for a job and take care of yourself, then that's what you need to do.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm going to repeat the question again for those who also would like to respond. How have you demonstrated your own loyalty and compassion and commitment to those you lead during challenging times or events over the past year? And Carmen, thank you for responding. That was great.
I'd like to respond to that question. Being a subject matter expert in this area, I felt that I needed to really do something. And what I thought would be the most beneficial, after hearing from a lot of people about, we want to talk about these topics, but we don't know how. We don't know what we as individuals can do. And I thought, let me put out as much information as I can put out so that people have the resources and the tools to have these very critical, but yet very, very tough conversations. So for example, everyone was talking about be an ally, be an ally. But no one really understood, what does that mean to be an ally? How do you become one? What does it look like for me as a person? What do I need to do? So we put out information, interactive videos, these type of things to basically say, here's what it means. This is what being an ally means in different circumstances. And here are some actionable steps that you can take, so that it's really important that they have these resources, because otherwise you're hearing these terms, you want to help, you want to do something, but you don't know how to do it. So that was really important for me to put out this kind of information. And the second thing that I was trying to do was say to the organizations that I work with is that you have to do something. This is not a time to sit back and just take a back seat to this. You have put out these mission statements, you have these internal mission statements. Demonstrate your commitment to your mission statements and do something. So if you say that you welcome and support diversity, say that publicly, but also broadcast it throughout your organization and say, this is what it looks like to us as an organization. We are going to live up to what we are doing. So I think for me, it was, just to sum it up, was two things. One, having the expertise in that, I wanted to put out as much information as I could put out so that people had the resources and the tools. And two was really to work with my clients and say, what are you going to do as an organization? And get them to not only take a stance, but then to take some actionable steps so that they can figure out how they can be a resource for their employees and also lead conversations in this area.
Dr. Gupta, thank you, especially as an advisor to, sweet, woo, sorry about that, C-suite executives who, that you help create just moments like this about making sure that you're providing the resources and tools to help manage those conversations is great. So thank you for that response. Before I move on to the next question, would someone else like to respond to that question that I just asked?
I'll jump in on with a really short one.
Thank you.
As Sanchita said, when you work in inclusion, you're asked to act and to demonstrate and to provide resources. And there is so much to do. But I think something in reflection over the last year, with as much need that there's been to supply all of our teams with the resources that they need right this minute, right? I think one of the things I've tried to practice as an individual is simply to slow down, to actually take that moment to check in with your staff, to check in with yourself and assess how you're feeling that day after the 15th day straight of responding to questions and to people's pain and to supporting them, but to actually check in with yourself and then check in with your teams. And an interesting thing we've started to practice is literally, everyone's trying to do their Zoom calls in 45 minutes, or let's try them in 30 minutes, but actually taking the 5 minutes, which are precious at the top, to ask people how they're doing and to let people be vulnerable for a moment. And that has really, number one, advanced how safe people feel in the environment, but also how seen they are for what they're experiencing and what this moment has meant for them personally. So just a little comment.
Christine, thank you. Especially, I know that you're a big believer in building community partnerships. So this question is so personal, and it's practice to slow down and to check in with your staff is just very beautiful. Thank you for that. Tracy, I'm not sure if you'd like to respond to that question.
Sure, I'll just quickly call out the idea of creating as many safe spaces for people as possible. As Christine noted, with my teams, we had many meetings where off the top, we did the how are you question, and then that's all we talked about the whole meeting. We never actually got to the meeting subject. There were tears, people needed the safe space, so we provided it. We also provided the space for people to not talk about it, especially as a person of color in this area, and I have a whole team who works on these issues for a large company. You are processing your own employees' trauma for your larger company while you're processing your own trauma as well. And it's, you get exhausted when you hear about the next incident or the next incident. Just hearing about it exhausts you. So if you want to take a day off, just take the day. We don't need to talk about it at all. And we also tried to provide opportunities for fun that had nothing to do with this. Let's get a DJ. Let's have a happy hour. Just let people blow off steam. But I think the number of opportunities for safe spaces and to realize that this is a trauma. This is trauma that we're all processing, and we all process it differently and have different needs is very important.
Thank you for that. So true. Wellness is so important. And as you're balancing creating strategic roadmaps, Tracy, you're also just being there for your people, right? And yourself is so critical. So I appreciate that. All right. So I'm going to move on for Christine. This particular question is for Christine. And why is it important for leaders to communicate during and respond to social unrest in an action-oriented manner?
Took some time to think about this one because we spend a lot of time working with leaders who are both not sure what to say. They want to be told sometimes because they don't want to do the wrong thing. Number one, they want to be perfect and respond with the perfect answer. And number three, they want to sound brilliant, and I guess that's part of trying to be perfect, right? The expectations that leaders set upon themselves. But what I try to share is, number one, it's an opportunity to practice inclusion with your own vulnerability. Being able to say, look, I'm not sure what to say, but I'm here. And I want to hear and understand where you're coming from. I think that just amazing opportunity to be visible and compassionate and to listen. And to miss that opportunity would be the antithesis, right? It would be, number one, tone deaf, but more importantly, you've missed that moment, right? And that's why timing is so important, is to be relevant and timely, because that moment to demonstrate your own vulnerability and your own compassion would be missed. And then secondly, what an amazing opportunity to advance your culture of inclusion, your culture of invitation and safety for your staff, and more importantly, for excellence, right? For everyone to be able to show up as their authentic self and bring their gifts to the table. You have the opportunity, the power as a leader to demonstrate that through your actions. And I think that's how I try to approach it. And I think if there's actions out of it, great. But the act of listening and demonstrating inclusion is the most important one. And frankly, through listening and seeing your people, you'll understand what needs to get done and be able to honestly assess it and weigh it, and more importantly, learn in your own journey. So I think it's an admission that we're in unprecedented times. And it requires agility and vulnerability as a leader to challenge the status quo. And I think that's the best way in my book to approach the situation. I think when we put the pressure on ourselves to be perfect, to make a bold action right off the bat without hearing what our teams really need from us and want from us, we run the risk of not only being tone deaf, but actually reversing all the great work that we've done in terms of creating an inclusive culture.
Thank you for that insight. One of our community agreements is just basically listen with your heart, and you just illustrated that with vision, with your being visible and compassionate, especially during this work. And you know, I love advancing your culture. It's an opportunity to do that, and you don't need to be perfect doing that. So thank you so much for that. Dr. Gupta, I have a question for you. How can leaders cultivate an environment that allows employees to work through their thoughts and questions about issues of racism?
So I would echo everything that Christine said. I absolutely agree with her. I think it's so important for leaders to take a moment and really listen. Listen with your whole heart. Don't be spending the time, we all do this in conversations where we're not really listening to the person. We're always, formulating the rebuttal already in our heads. Don't do that. Don't push back. Don't judge. Understand that their experience is their experience. You don't get to judge and decide whether their experience is real or not, whether it's important or not, whether it's relevant or not. You've got to really listen and say, I hear you. You don't have to agree with them. I'm not telling you that you have to agree with them, but I'm saying you've got to listen and honor that this is their experience. And I think it's so important to create the space and the culture so that people feel safe talking about issues of race within our country. We have never had a national dialogue on race. We started having a national dialogue during the civil rights movement, but think about how many people were actually exposed to it. TV was not something that was in everyone's home. You only got your news through the evening news. So people would get little snippets of information about what was going around the country, and even that galvanized them. Now we've got the 24-hour news cycle, and we're all seeing this as it's taking place. So we have to have that space within our organizations to feel comfortable talking about race. We've made it such a difficult topic, such an adversarial topic to talk about, and there's no reason why we cannot have thoughtful, productive, respectful conversations about race. So I would say that the biggest thing that leaders can do is to create that space. And it can be a listening session. We've seen so many of our clients having listening sessions where they're facilitated sessions where employees can just come and talk about, here's what we're feeling right now. This is what's going on for us. And just create that space where they can listen, where you can listen, where they can ask any questions that they want to ask and get the information that's needed. And I think it's giving people a moment of grace for everybody, not just leaders, because people should be able to ask whatever they need to ask and not feel scared. Not feel scared that I'm asking a question where someone's going to jump down my throat, but really create that environment. So we held an open DEI discussion session the morning after the verdict came out, and we put our discussion questions to the side, and we started out with, does anybody want to talk about the verdict? How are you all doing? Let's check in and see what you're doing. And we spent half of our time talking about the verdict and what feelings it brought up for people. So again, it's creating that space. And I think if leaders can do that for their employees, it gives people a place to process what they're feeling. As Tracy was saying, as people of color, you're processing your own trauma, your own reaction to what's going on in the news, what's going on, the events, in addition to, trying to be the expert. And that's why I think it's so fair to just grab the nearest person of color and make them and say, okay, explain this to us. It's not their job to explain it. It's up to all of us to educate ourselves. So I think, to Christine's point, to really for leaders to take that time to educate themselves and to become knowledgeable about these issues and really listen and say, I'm not the expert, but I want to learn. And so I can help lead my company through this process. So I think if we can do that, if we can admit the fact that we need to learn, if we can create those safe spaces so that we can have these very important discussions, I think that'll go a long way towards helping employees process what we're all going through.
Dr. Gupta, thank you. Again, the theme of listening, being thoughtful and respectful, and really leaders are creating that space who are leading their organizations. If you all are just joining us, thank you for joining the Leading in Purpose, Care, and Vision during times of social change. You're welcome if you've just joined us. So, Carmen, what is the responsibility of leaders and managers to motivate change to corporate policies, and practices that do not promote racial equity?
It's so hard because as we each have come into our new jobs, we inherit so much of these structures that are not equitable, right? And if it were up to us and creating things from scratch, things would look very different. But we inherit these existing policies. And too often staff who are more junior are the ones pointing out discrepancies or things that need to be changed. If I can bring it to pop culture for a minute, if anyone here is a Bachelor Nation fan, of which I unashamedly am one, in the After the Final Rose special, Matt James told his ex-fiancee Rachel, what hurt the most was even needing to explain to you why you posing 3 years ago in antebellum photos was hurtful to me. And so for staff to even have to point out why things are problematic in the first place is a first layer of emotional labor that they shouldn't have to do. And then to have to advocate for the solution on top of that is just more emotional labor. So it really is incumbent on leaders and managers to institutionalize that change. So I want to give a couple of examples here. At my last job, one of the last policy changes that I was able to implement before I left was a pay matrix. When you look at the top 10% of top 10 and bottom 10% of who makes the most and who makes the least at your company, what percentage of that are women? What percentage of women and non-binary folks? What percentage of that are people of color? And so in looking at that, we said, hey, to institutionalize more standard salary changes across the board for years to come, let's establish this pay matrix. So there's no question of, did I get this salary because I'm of a certain identity? Or, you know, like my boss was biased against me. And then culture-wise, there's definitely practices that need to be established. So women of color in a leadership role at my last job was told by another leadership staff member that she was only picked to be on the executive team because she was a woman of color. Now, this happened before I stepped into the role. And in that situation, what needs to happen among leaders in terms of changing that practice is really not making excuses for people. I feel like, especially in the past years, people are like, I'm learning, you know, like what Dr. Gupta mentioned earlier, it really is such a fine line between asking a question out of sheer not knowing and making really ignorant statements like that. Not saying that someone was only put in a certain position because she's a woman of color. And so if I were in that role then, when that statement was made, I would have a direct conversation with that employee. And if it were up to me, I would issue a verbal warning about why that kind of behavior is unacceptable. I find that especially in the past year, people aren't really spurred to make changes until they're forced to face consequences. And those consequences really come from the top down.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you for that insight. I am going to move on to some questions that will, again, continue to have this conversation. So do you offer space for employees, and some of you have alluded to this already, to share their thoughts regarding racism with others? How can others create similar spaces in their organizations? And I want to preface this as that it is challenging to do this because of the fear of individuals beginning to talk about race, and is that going to impact productivity? Is that going to impact conversations and split individuals? So with that said, I just, again, do you offer spaces for employees to share their thoughts regarding racism with others? I'm going to leave that open for someone to jump in with that question.
I'll start. I mean, I'll say that I work for a pretty conservative company. We've been around a long time, getting on to 100 years. And I think a lot of folks think of us as a sort of very traditional in a lot of ways. But the last 2 years, we've been hosting what we're calling brave space conversations. And what we found was these conversations, number one, it could be hosted by anyone, but generally hosted by a lot of our employee resource groups. And anytime they felt that there was a need from employees to have a conversation, whether it be about a news headline or something that's going on in their community, or a verdict, for example, last week. And what was helpful was creating a framework around it that gave people the courage to host a conversation like that, provide resources to them, like how do you prepare for that dialogue? How, as a moderator, do you listen and to invite conversation and not judge? And then bring resources to the room, knowing that it is private and safe, but also to provide resources outside of that room, because not everything's going to get addressed in that room. And what we found is as the framework has supported folks who felt unsure about having these conversations, it has really increased not only the number of sessions that have happened, but the courage to have them. And more importantly, I think it's expanded its practice in everyday culture in the company, so that it has less to do with a formalized session that is called a brave space conversation. And we hope that it ultimately becomes practiced with an employee and their leader, two employees who might be coming from two totally different places, not all employees who are talking from the same perspective. And so I'd say the first thing is to create some safety nets and just try it. And I'll tell you that some of the most fearful folks, in employee relations or in HR, were the quickest to adopt it after they participated themselves. And so it's exciting to see something so formalized catch into a wildfire, and to see employees practicing it every day. That's where it gets really exciting.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Christine was saying, I think the important part is creating those safe spaces like we talked about, and then also making sure it's endemic to team meetings, stand-ups, etc. Because in terms of, well, we shouldn't discuss it because it may impact productivity. What does impact productivity is when someone on your team is dealing with trauma like the Atlanta shootings or like George Floyd, and their productivity is impacted because they're processing things. So to bring it up at your actual business meeting, right? And the leader has to take kind of the lead there and say, here's the feelings I'm having. Does anyone want to talk about their feelings? And really like make that space and that awareness for the whole team. Because if someone doesn't want to be like, well, Tracy didn't pull her weight this week, I'd be like, I needed the week off because I just had to process and sit back and take my time. So it goes back to what I talked about earlier, in the panel about being endemic. Every meeting, diversity, every meeting, let's talk about where we are, so that it doesn't become like a weighty thing, right? That we always feel like it has to be a thing. It just becomes part of our everyday conversation, because frankly, some of us can't escape it in our everyday life. So, let's call that out.
Tracy, this leads me to a question that I meant to ask you, and it's actually a great transition for this. And what is the importance of prioritizing your own emotional well-being during times of crisis, when you're looked upon to lead, right? And all of us here, the panel I'm hearing, have definitely had to step up. But can you address that question for us, please?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that, because that's really near and dear to my heart. After last year, I would think coming up in big corporations, I think the first, 10, 20 years of my career were characterized by the adage, be the duck, right? And you're really smooth above the surface, and under the surface, you're always paddling. But especially as a woman of color, you always have to appear not rattled. And in the last couple of years, I believe that's been a 180. I think in terms of authenticity, as we talked about earlier, to say out like, I need help, I'm drowning, I can't deal with this, I'm burned out, is really important. And especially as leaders, if you want your people to come to you and do that, you have to first exhibit it yourself. So the adage I'm probably going with more now is, you have to put on your oxygen mask first before you can help someone else. If you're passed out, you can't be there for your team. Or if you're in a relationship, you can't be a good person in a relationship for your partner if you are not, if you don't love yourself, essentially, to quote RuPaul, I guess. So, you would definitely have to make sure that you're exhibiting it, that you're not shooting emails to people at night, that you're not shooting emails to them on the weekend. But I just came off of 6 weeks of leave because after the last year, I have a 3-year-old, and I would get done with my day of work and I would find myself short with her because I was so emotionally wrung out from the day of handling everyone's emotions, including mine. And I luckily I worked for a company that allowed leave, and I just took 6 weeks of parental leave just to hang out with her and just focus on her. And because I wanted to show my team, like, you can do this. We tell people, oh, okay, go ahead and take leave. But then if I'm never taking leave, or if I'm emailing you on your vacation, it doesn't really make you feel like you can. So it's so important. You cannot be there for your team if you don't have, your cup is not full. You can't pour out for other people. So it really is exhibiting leadership just like we do in every other aspect of our jobs.
It's a great point. And it's okay to take care of yourself. As a matter of fact, it's much needed to do that. So thank you. I appreciate for you responding to that question. It's something that we sometimes don't do for a million reasons. So thank you. I'm going to move us to another question. And what can leaders do if those they report to are silent during events that expose people to the realities of racism? We ask the question again. What can leaders do if those they report to are silent during events that expose people to the realities of racism? Anyone can, any of the panelists can respond to that question at this point.
I'll just say that it's important sometimes to, again, name the problem, talk to the leader about why they're silent. Sometimes I will say oftentimes I find it's because people don't know what to say and are afraid of screwing something up. So to have that one-on-one conversation and kind of broach it like, hey, I noticed we haven't said anything about this. Did you have thoughts about how we might address it? And always come at it with a we, not a you. Because a we is a team atmosphere, and a you can come off as accusatory and you can get defensive. But talk, and you can also admit, like, I don't know what to say. What do you think we should say? And really treat it as kind of an equal playing field, I think, is important. So if the silence comes from there, that would be my advice. If the silence comes from, I don't think it's important, then that's a different problem. That needs a different addressing, I would say.
Thank you, Tracy. Anyone else like to?
Well, I'll just jump in. So on top of, I totally agree with Tracy. I think you do have to have the courage to ask a question and challenge your leader to think differently, to just reset the table in terms of when are the times we should say something. But then I think there's nothing that keeps you from saying something. And I think that's where the personal accountability comes in, to step up to what you know is right and live the change and demonstrate the change through your own personal action. I think that's what makes it safe for your leaders and for your employees.
Anyone else would like that question before we almost move into our last question? Can't believe it. I've learned so much, and I'm just blessed again. For those of you who just joined us, leading with purpose, care, and vision during times of social change.
I think we also, excuse me, I think we have to keep in mind that leaders don't have all the answers, nor should they be put in a position where they feel like they have to have all the answers. I had a CEO share with me that, and he's a CEO of a large multinational corporation, and he said, I had just had a 25-year-old jump down my throat because I used the wrong gender pronoun. I'm really trying. I'm trying to learn. But I also need people to understand that I'm going to make mistakes, and I need people to give me the ability to make mistakes and give me that chance to learn as well, because I don't have all the answers. So I think we need to hold our leaders accountable. We need to ask them to educate themselves, but we also need to give them space to learn, because they're on a journey as well. This is not a journey that they have mastered. None of us, I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't consider that I've mastered this journey. I'm still on a DEI journey. And so I think we have to also give them that space. And when they realize that, look, I can make a mistake and not have everyone jump down my throat, then they're more willing to try and make those mistakes as they're learning themselves. So I think if we can acknowledge that they are also on a journey, we can create, just like we want a safe space for us to be able to talk, we need to create a safe space for leaders to learn and also make mistakes.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. That's a great point. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us towards our last question. This is that tool bag that a lot of folks like to, be able to just reach into. So what is one or two concrete steps that our attendees can take to shift their own leadership styles to meet this moment? And I'll go ahead and start off with Christine.
Thanks, Paco. I'll actually just start really quick because someone in the chat box asked about safety nets, and I didn't want to leave that hanging. I think that was from the last question. Some of the other panelists probably have other ideas on their own safety nets that they put out there for leaders. But I'll just mention a couple that are easy ones that most folks can think about. Is think about the mental health resources that are available to folks online or through your health plans or through other resources in your company, including your ER representatives, because if there is truly an employee discrimination problem, you should be able to address that. And it's surprising to me all the time that folks don't know that those resources exist for them. And who do they go to when there is truly a problem in the workplace? So number one, have that handy and do your research and make sure you know that exists, because we shouldn't be afraid to recommend that, because there is no workplace that wants that to be happening. So we need to shed light on what that process is. And then I think the other thing is knowing that you can't do everything in the room. What other resources exist around the company? I get the question a lot around what can I do? Like, can I volunteer? Can I march? Can I be part of a larger movement? And if there are resources like that that you're aware of, that you've tapped into, that a place where you can put your energy, that I think is really appreciated. And I get that a lot. Like, what are things in the community that I could be doing that would make a difference outside of the workplace? So I hope that's helpful. But pivoting back to your question, there's so much to unpack in your question to boil down to one or two concrete steps. But I'll just touch on two things that I don't think we got into too much today. And one is truth and reconciliation. And that can happen at the individual level for yourself, and it can happen at the company level. And when I say those words, it sounds like a lot to tackle, but it really comes down to, what is the truth about where we are, where you are in your journey, where your company is or your organization is in their journey, and really being able to speak truth about it, right? And to assess what is the truth of the state that we are in as a company. By not saying it out loud, that creates that culture of exclusion, of denial, right? And of feeling like you're bearing the real issues. So truth is one thing, and Carmen mentioned going at that by quantitative measurement, right? Like what should we look like? The world is 50% women, and do we look like that at all levels in our organization? And how do we feel about that? That's problematic in our industry, or problematic in this role, or problematic in my book club, whatever it might be, right? So being truthful about that and owning up to it is so important. And an example of that could be, I work for Disney, and looking back at the harmful kinds of stories that we told at some point in our history is really important and something that we needed to do in order to move forward and vision where we were headed. But so many storytellers were afraid to talk about that because they knew they were harmful, and it was difficult to talk about, difficult to own up to. And I think it was very freeing once we started to assess what those things were and talk about that in the open. So truth and reconciliation. And then the second thing is really assessing what parts of the system are truly biased, because the systems of bias are what perpetuate the problems, and no amount of individual action is going to fix everything unless the systems also get addressed. And that sounds really big and really hard to tackle, but those systems can be the systems that you're participating in every day. It could be the way you go about hiring, the 2-week window that you always have to identify candidates, or it could be who gets to speak in your staff meeting. If I'm the only one speaking, that's a system that I've created that's a problem. And so really thinking about the systems you participate in, that you are part of, and that you can change. So sorry to take so much time, but I really wanted to touch on those two things that we didn't get a chance to tackle today.
No, thank you very much for that insight. And thank you for, again, addressing just even reducing stigma that's associated with mental health, as well as you provided that resource to one of the members of the chat participants. So again, the question is, what are one or two concrete steps that our attendees can take to shift their own leadership styles to meet this moment? And Dr. Gupta.
So I would echo everything that Christine said. I think it's so important to keep all of that in mind. But as far as so I'll go to tactical since she covered the broader viewpoint. I think leaders need to think of themselves as allies. And I think that they need to learn what that means and educate themselves, be open, be vulnerable, be able to listen without judgment. So definitely, take that ownership of becoming an ally and everything that includes. I think they need to model the behavior. I've seen so many leaders say, yes, we respect women. Yes, we are, a meritocracy, et cetera, as they go about interrupting women during meetings. So even something like, how do you behave at meetings? How do you conduct meetings? Are you creating a space where everyone has a seat at the table? Are you interrupting women midpoint? Are you making sure that women's points are heard? We've all heard the whole thing about, women state a point, no one listens to them, a man restates that point, and everyone's like, oh, that's a great idea. So it's tactical things like this. Keep an eye on what you yourself are doing, and keeping what Christine was talking about, bias. Everything we do has bias in it because that's just the way our brains operate. But really look at how are you perpetuating that bias and making sure that you are modeling the behavior you are asking your company to do. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is I absolutely agree that these systems that are in place are really perpetuating so many of the issues that we see in our day-to-day lives. Leaders have the ability to do something about those systems. So take ownership of that, put those policies into place, make them policies that actually do something, not just policies in name only, but make them impactful policies, and take ownership of, I as the leader of this organization can do something about the systemic racism, sexism, et cetera, that is in our environment, and take ownership of that. So the three things: one, being an ally, modeling the behavior that you're telling other people to model, make sure you're modeling that themselves, and then take on the systemic issues that are present because you have the power to do that as an organization. So those are the three things I would suggest.
Thank you so much. Tracy.
I'll be quick because I know we're almost at time, and I'll get even more tactical than Dr. Gupta. We're all going down a level. But I would encourage people, and if you are in a leadership position, obviously you have certain competencies, you've gotten to a certain level through certain years of experience. My first piece of advice would be to treat this just like any other business competency that you feel like that you need to strengthen. You know where your gaps are and then work to strengthen and live in those gaps and make them better. If you sold a product, if you got hired by a widget factory and you're like, oh no, I don't know anything about widgets, you would do all the reading you could. Treat it the exact same way. It's not scary when you think of it that way, right? What are populations you don't know about, right? When I took one job, I realized, outside of my colloquial knowledge of people who are LGBTQ plus, I didn't actually know about the specific, the endemic struggles they faced. And, or my knowledge of the trans community was actually not as strong as it could be. So I joined all the pride events I could, I talked to as many people as I could. And that was me saying, hey, this is a gap in my knowledge. And this is something that I need to be better at. As leaders, we do that all the time with our business acumen. We just bring it to this space and do the exact same thing. And my second piece of advice would be, and this is another one that is really just analogous to your business world, just show up. If we're talking about these issues, don't have all your Black employees in a room talking about George Floyd. The number of events I've been to where it was just preaching to the choir, where everybody in the room looked the same, we're all talking about the problems, and there was nobody who looked different than me in the room. That's just going to be self-perpetuating. It's not going to fix anything. Show up to these events, show up to these conversations, show up in those hard moments. Don't shy away from it. Even showing up and saying, I don't know what to do is an important thing. And that's a win. So literally think about it just like you think about any other thing that you've strengthened or grown or developed over the course of your career, for sure.
Thank you, Tracy. And Carmen.
Okay, I just have one, which is how do you use your privilege to make room for other people? And I'm not talking about donating. I'm not talking about posting on social media or reading more articles. I mean, how do you step aside and actually physically make room for other people? So the best example was last year in June, Alexis Ohanian stepped down from the Reddit board and said that he's stepping down so that a Black person can fill that seat. That is like the ultimate example of saying, hey, I have this privilege as a white man, someone else needs to be in the seat so they can also be part of the change that Reddit wants to see. In my last job, whenever people left and a current staff member got promoted, hey, I have access to a lot of salary information, right? I never divulged what the previous person was making, but I did tell the new person like, hey, maybe you should negotiate for a little bit more, just to really empower people and make sure that they're not getting the short end of that stick.
Wow, I can't believe this. This was incredibly insightful. And I just thank you all for your comprehensive, thoughtful, lean into it, authentic responses. I was really blessed to be with all of you today. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our UCLA Alumni Association, sustaining donors. The association's program and services are made possible by Bruins like you. So thank you. And just to wrap this up, please join the summit wrap up and closing keynote. Emotional labor is not free, led by our very own Dartini Escorza, who's the president of our UCLA Alumni Association. That starts at 2:15. Thank you all for the participants, the panelists, and those of you who joined us. Appreciate you all very much. Take care, be safe. Go Bruins.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.